Surely nothing can go wrong with an ethical theory about loving your neighbour? Well, actually, it can. Welcome to Untangled Philosophy. Today we're finding the holes in Joseph Fletcher's Situation Ethics and discovering what he really means when he tells you to love your neighbour. Personalism is one of the 4 working principles of situation ethics, which together form the foundation of the ethical theory. Personalism tells us to put people first, and this is reinforced by one of the theory's propositions, which tells us to love our neighbour. Fletcher makes it clear that neighbour encompasses all persons, but what is a person? This may not at first seem like a problem until we discover what Joseph Fletcher has to say about people with Down syndrome. People who have a baby with Down syndrome have no reason to feel guilty about putting a Down syndrome baby away, whether it's put away in the sense of hidden in a sanitarium or in a more responsible, lethal sense. It is sad, yes, dreadful, but it carries no guilt. True guilt arises only from an offence against a person, and a Downs is not a person. This is what Fletcher has to say about what qualifies as a person. To be a human is to be self-aware, consciously related to others, capable of rationality in a measure at least sufficient to support some initiative. When these things are absent, or cannot ever come to be, there is neither a potential nor an actual person. What Fletcher is arguing in this piece as a whole is that if one gives birth to a baby that has an unexpected condition that had you known about earlier, you would have aborted the pregnancy, then you ought to be able to painlessly end the life of the baby after giving birth. And this is said within the context of feelings of guilt. You ought not feel guilty about this because you haven't committed an offence against a person. What I want to draw attention to is 2 things. Firstly, his claims of personalistic ethics is not as inclusive as it first seems. Yes, you should love your neighbour and put people first, unless your neighbour has Down syndrome or they haven't been born yet. Secondly, the theory is individualistic and subjective, because there can be disagreements about the most loving thing. What is the most loving thing to you might be different to me, and this case highlights this point perfectly. While Fletcher may think that aborting a fetus with Down syndrome is the most loving thing to do, even if you agree with him on this point, we can see that someone could argue that the most loving thing is instead to accept the person as they are, to birth them and show them love and kindness. From the position of love, that would be an entirely valid stance to take. This subjective element could be taken as a positive of the theory. We may expect disagreements because we have differing opinions about what constitutes the most loving thing. As such, it may be a strength that the theory captures these differences. On the other hand, we may expect a moral theory to give more concrete answers to difficult moral questions. We may want some objectivity to prevent moral questions from being arbitrary, which is the risk if we lack a consensus on what the most loving action is in a specific situation. Furthermore, to what extent are disagreements about the most loving thing valid? Can love justify questionable acts? What about honour killings? Honour killing is an act of murder, although it is not seen that way by the perpetrators, often against a family member or member of the community for the so-called crime of dishonouring that family or community. The perpetrators may very well consider it not just their duty to rid themselves of this stain on their honour, but also to see it as the most loving thing to do for everyone involved. Does situation ethics provide us with the tools to challenge this view? Mother Teresa was praised as being the pure embodiment of the commandment to love your neighbour. Thus she becomes a brilliant example of love in action. Yet she was also criticised for caring more about the souls of those in her care than their physical bodies. From her point of view, that makes complete sense. The soul is eternal, and ensuring its safe passage to heaven is essential. But critic and author Christopher Hitchens alleged that people died in her care who need only have been sent to a hospital. A counter-argument may be that Fletcher does provide a means to ensure agape love is properly applied, in the form of the Agapeic Calculus. I have dealt with the Agapeic Calculus in my other video on criticisms, but to summarise the discussion here, the Agapeic Calculus is left vague and undefined, and is in fact given very little attention by Fletcher in his book. We are told to act so as to bring about the greatest amount of neighbour welfare for the greatest number of neighbours possible. While the Agapeic Calculus has the potential to bring about some objectivity to situation ethics, we still have the same problem as before, this time with welfare being left vague and undefined and leading to disagreements. Fletcher commits the fallacy of appealing to authority. This occurs when someone fails to support their point of view with arguments, and instead simply points out that someone else, often in a position of authority, said something similar, as if this fact alone suffices to defend their position. The Agapeic Calculus is a perfect example of one instance in which Fletcher commits this fallacy. He admits that his calculus is just a rejigging of the utilitarian hedonic calculus, but he makes no attempt to defend the hedonic or his altered Agapeic calculus, despite a myriad of criticisms that can be levelled against it, such as its impracticality. Fletcher appears to think it's sufficient to simply name-drop the doctrine of utilitarianism and the ethical heavyweights of Jeremy Bentham and John Stuart Mill, as if nothing else needs to be said. On this basis, it becomes plain that as the love ethics searches seriously for a social policy, it must form a coalition with utilitarianism. It takes over from Bentham and Mill the strategic principle of the greatest good of the greatest number. But that's about it. No need to defend this position. Bentham and Mill said it, so if it's good enough for them, then it should be good enough for you. In conclusion, Joseph Fletcher's Situation Ethics leads to disagreements about the most loving thing. It struggles to give consistent answers to ethical questions, and some may view this as a strength, but others may expect an ethical theory to provide more concrete answers to moral difficulties. This problem becomes confounded if acting from love may in fact justify questionable actions. The Agapeic Calculus has the potential to help us respond to these criticisms, but instead of a much-needed defence of its merits, Fletcher commits the fallacy of appealing to authority as his only means of supporting the calculus. What do you think about situation ethics? Is it really as bad as I've made out, or am I being unfair? Thank you for watching. See you next time.